off with our blood biochemistry. These are our objectives. Okay, so we'll be discussing or reviewing the basic properties of your blood and the blood plasma, and we are going to discuss the following plasma proteins. There are a lot of plasma proteins, but we're just going to discuss these ones, these common ones. We are going to illustrate the process by which your plasma proteins would participate in iron metabolism and homeostasis, compare hemostasis and thrombosis, illustrate the stages of hemostasis, platelet activation and steps in blood coagulation pathway, the role of vitamin K and calcium in blood coagulation, and then lastly, we will be discussing also the regulators and antagonists of your blood clotting mechanism. Okay, so your blood is a viscous fluid that with a cellular portion and a fluid portion. Okay, and when blood is centrifuged in the presence of an anticoagulant, a pellet of blood cells form, which would occupy around 40 to 50% of the total blood volume. Okay. Now, the cellular portion of the blood is comprised of RBCs, WBCs, and your platelets. Now, the WBCs and platelets are concentrated in this middle band here, which you call your buffy coat layer. And the remaining fluid portion, this yellow color here, is what you call your plasma. This is the fluid that remains after blood is centrifuged in the presence of an anticoagulant. However, when clotting is induced before centrifugation, the resulting fluid is not anymore what you call plasma, but rather it's already serum. And this has basically the same composition as that of your plasma, except that it is void of your fibrinogen and other clotting factors that has been consumed during your clotting. Okay. Now, blood has many functions, and it is the primary avenue by which your tissues are connected to each other, as well as to the environment. And it serves for your transport. It also has regulatory functions and even protective functions. So your blood is important in the exchange of gases during respiration, transport of your absorbed food materials, as well as metabolites, transport of your metabolic waste through the kidneys, the lungs, the skin, and the intestines for excretion. And the regulatory functions of blood will include maintenance of your acid-base balance, distribution of body heat, and even regulation of water balance through its effects on the exchange of water between the circulating fluid and the tissue fluid, and also the regulation of mechanism through the activation of several of your hormones. Now, your blood also functions as defense, against infections by your WBCs, your antibodies, or even protection against bleeding, through your coagulation function. Okay, now the plasma composition. Okay, the plasma composition is the same as that all of your extracellular fluid, except that it contains higher amounts of your proteins as well as your cations as compared to that of your interstitium. Remember that your interstitium is separated from that of your plasma via this capillary membrane. And your capillary membrane has this capillary pores which should allow water-soluble substances to pass through this capillary membrane. However, your capillary pores are not big enough to allow the free exchange of your larger proteins between the plasma and the interstitium. And so these proteins are necessarily trapped within the capillaries, okay, in your plasma. And since these proteins are negatively charged, the cations would necessarily be attracted to it somehow. And so there's also difficulty, no, or lesser, no, free exchange of your cations, no, between the plasma as well as the interstitium, no. So these cations are slightly also expected to be increased in the plasma as compared to that of your interstitium, and this is due to what you call your Donan effect. Now, the aggregate concentration of your proteins that is present in the plasma is around 7 to 7.5 grams per deciliter. And your plasma contains a complex mixture of your proteins, which forms the major part, no, of solids in the plasma. They tend to be rich in your disulfide bonds, and they may exist as either simple proteins, or they may contain carbohydrates that are or they may contain bound carbohydrates, which is your glycoproteins, and lipids, your lipoproteins. Okay. Now take note that the single most important protein, no, in your plasma is your albumin. Quantitatively, no, it has 40 grams per liter. Now, with the exception of your fibrinogen, the other proteins are known collectively as your globulin. Okay. Now take note also that it is only the changes in the more abundant plasma proteins that's going to have a significant effect on your plasma protein concentration. No? So what are these abundant plasma proteins? So basically, sabi nga natin, it's your albumin and even your immunoglobulin. No, there are certain conditions that may cause changes in the concentration of your plasma proteins. No? And except when the patient has been given blood or proteins intravenously, a rapid increase in your total plasma protein concentration is almost always due to a decrease in your volume distribution brought about, no, primarily by your dehydration. Or on the other hand, a rapid decrease, no, in is often the result of your volume expansion. This is secondary to your overhydration. Or another scenario would be plasma protein concentration can also fall because of an increase in your capillary permeability, secondary to let's say endothelial dysfunction, as in cases of sepsis, and this would bring about protein diffusion into the interstitial space, no, placing you at a relatively decreased concentration of plasma proteins. Now, the concentration of your plasma proteins is important in determining the distribution of your fluid between the blood and the tissues, because your plasma proteins exerts oncotic pressure. No? So with the decrease in plasma protein concentration, no, fluid is not attracted back into intravascular compartment, and so you expect accumulation of fluid in the extracellular, or extravascular space, causing now or resulting in a condition which you call edema. Now, your plasma proteins, there are two main methods by which your plasma proteins can be separated. No, one would be the salting out method, and another would be your electrophoresis. Now, I have attached the link of a YouTube link from on regarding your salting out process in your manuals. You can probably view it, no, after this lecture. Now, you're salting out, this is the making use of your solvents or electrolytes, or both, no, such as your sodium or ammonium sulfate, to remove protein fractions in accordance with their solubility characteristics. So here, what happens is that you actually saturate, no, you saturate the water molecules with your cations, no, so that there won't be any more available water molecules to establish hydrogen bonding with your protein, so that your proteins would necessarily precipitate and be salted out and separated from that solution. Now, what about your electrophoresis? The electrophoresis, this is the study of your molecular migration of charged molecules in the electric field, and this is and it is influenced by the size, the shape, the charge, and the chemical composition of the molecules. Now, this is the most common method of analyzing plasma proteins, and here plasma proteins are being separated according to their charge or mass ratio. Okay, now your protein electrophoresis is commonly used for the detection of your what we call your paraproteins. Now, these are monoclonal proteins that are produced by tumors of the B cell origin. Now, this for your electrophoresis, the specimen that you usually use is your serum and rather than your plasma, because the presence of your fibrinogen in the plasma would unnecessarily produce a band in the B region. Basically this is the B region. In the B region that might be mistaken for a paraprotein. So clotting of the plasma is induced first to remove that fibrinogen, and what would remain is your serum. Now that serum is a small amount of that serum is going to be applied on that strip. And that stained strip is what you call your electrophoretogram. Now, this strip is going to be placed in the electrolyte buffer of your desired pH as well as voltage, and then this would now permit the resolution of your plasma proteins into these 5 bands here at the right upper hand corner. Okay. Now, the positively charged proteins would migrate towards the cathode, and the negatively charged proteins would migrate towards the anode. And then subsequently, this is going to be quantified using your densitometric scanning machine. Okay. Now, using your electrophoresis, the protein composition of your plasma can be separated into 5 components, as I have mentioned earlier. The extreme left in your cathode would be your albumin, and the rest would be your globulins. Your globulins are globular proteins. They have a higher molecular weight as compared to that of your albumin. They are insoluble in your water, but they are soluble in your dilute salt solutions. They are categorized as your alpha, your beta, or your gamma globulins. And they are distinguished from one another by using your serum protein electrophoresis. Now, your alpha is the lightest, and the gamma is the heaviest. So therefore, your gamma is the slowest to segregate in gel electrophoresis, and so it is the one that is nearer the starting point. Now, what about your albumin? Your albumin is also a globular protein, but however, it is not classified as your globulin, and it is water soluble, and it is unglycosylated. Now, fibrinogen is this glycoprotein that has been removed previously from your plasma. To produce your serum. It is a soluble glycoprotein, and it is important in your blood clotting. Okay. Now, your plasma protein levels change in response to your inflammation, infection, or even trauma, and these proteins are called your acute phase reactant proteins. And your electrophoretogram is a useful screening and monitoring of your protein pattern alteration in this disease condition, such as what I have mentioned earlier. It is important for detecting your paraproteins in your produced by your tumors of the beta cells. Now, your paraproteins, these are your paraproteins, and this is the gamma region. So your paraproteins typically migrates in the gamma region, but they may actually migrate up to the beta region, as is in the case of what you call your polyclonal gammopathy. So there is a polyclonal increase in your immunoglobulin, as in cases of your autoimmune disease or even chronic infections. Now, what about this one? As you can see here, there is the presence here of excessive amounts of your immunoglobulin, characteristic of your paraproteinemia that is produced by a clone of plasma cells in the bone marrow associated with your myeloma. What about this one? There is a drop, no, in your immunoglobulin, as in cases of hypogammaglobulinemia, and this could be indicative of immunosuppression. Now, there are some few different, generalizations for your plasma proteins. Number one, most of your plasma proteins are synthesized in the liver. Okay, and then another, your plasma proteins, many would exhibit polymorphism and they have a characteristic half-life in the circulation. Now, by half-life, we mean that this is the time that is required for 50% of the molecule to be degraded or cleared from the blood at any given moment. Okay, now your plasma proteins, normally they are synthesized and cleared at a steady state wherein there is no net increase or decrease that is evident. However, in disease conditions may actually alter the half-life of your plasma proteins, as what we will be discussing later on. Now, as mentioned, most of your plasma proteins are synthesized in the liver. 70 to 80% of the time they're synthesized in your liver, and the liver synthesizes around 25 grams of your plasma proteins every day, and this would account for approximately around 50% of your total protein synthesis by the liver. And your plasma proteins are synthesized in your membrane-bound polyribosomes in the liver. So you have this list of plasma proteins that are being synthesized in the liver. Okay, and there's just some exception. One would be your immunoglobulin. These are synthesized by your plasma cells. In general, your components of the complements are being synthesized in the liver, except for your von Willebrand's factor that is synthesized by your vascular endothelium. And another exception would be your gamma globulins. They are synthesized by your lymphocytes. Now, as mentioned, most of your plasma proteins are glycoproteins. So meaning they are proteins that contain oligosaccharide chains that are covalently attached to your polypeptide backbone. And an exception would be your albumin. Your albumin does not contain sugar residues. Okay. Now, as mentioned, you have this in your manual. Most of your plasma proteins are synthesized as a pre-proteins in membrane-bound polyribosomes in your rough endoplasmic reticulum. And they contain this amino terminal signal sequence. And after binding to your signal recognition particle and subsequently binding to that SRP receptor, the emerging polysaccharide polypeptide chain rather, is going to be pulled through by your SRP into the lumen of this endoplasmic reticulum. And this is followed subsequently by the cleavage of your signal sequence by your signal peptidase. So subsequently, these proteins going to traverse the secretory route into now your smooth endoplasmic reticulum, your Golgi, or your secretory vesicles, and would subsequently undergo post-translational modification and then be secreted into the plasma. Now, as mentioned, your plasma proteins are synthesized in the liver, and they are likewise degraded in the liver. Now, how are your plasma proteins being degraded? So remember, most of your plasma proteins are glycoproteins. So they contain this oligosaccharide chain that is ending in your sialic acid, that is bound to your galactose residues. Now, they are covalently attached to your polypeptide backbone, except as mentioned that of your albumin. Now, the sialic acid residues are going to be eventually degraded by what you call your endothelial neuraminases, resulting now in the exposure of this galactose residues of your and then subsequently this is going to bind to what you call your sialoglycoprotein receptors in your hepatocytes, and subsequently this is going to be to undergo endocytosis and lysosomal degradation. Now, your plasma proteins also exhibit polymorphism, and by polymorphism, this means that this is a Mendelian trait, no, that exists in a population in at least 2 phenotypes, and neither of which are rare. No, phenotype meaning this is the observable characteristic or trait, no, of an organism. No, so the best known example of your human polymorphism is that of your ABO blood group. Now, other plasma proteins that exhibit polymorphism, you have your alpha-1 antitrypsin, your haptoglobin, transferrin, ceruloplasmin, and even your immunoglobulins. Now, your plasma proteins may act as an anti-protease. An example of this would be your alpha-1 antitrypsin. Your alpha-1 antitrypsin is capable of neutralizing proteases, primarily your neutrophil elastase or your protein elastase, which is capable of degrading your elastin during acute inflammation. No, so this is basically protective, no, for us, no, at the time of infection and inflammation. This is a protease inhibitor. Now, the other functions of your plasma proteins would include blood clotting, no, enzymatic functions, and your hormonal functions. Okay. Now, certain plasma proteins would likewise act, no, for immune defense, while others would act as acute phase reactants, such as your CRP or C-reactive protein, no, as well as your calcitonin. Now, your CRP is an acute phase protein, no, that stimulates the complement pathway. Now, your acute phase protein increases at the time of inflammation, no, and this is as a result of increase in the synthesis, no, of this proteins that is mediated by your interleukin-6 and other cytokines. Now, most importantly, your plasma protein would act as a transport binding protein, no, that protects against the toxic effects of certain substances or even early degradation of these substances. No, so we have mentioned earlier your albumin. Your albumin is able to bind substances, no, particularly drugs, in a reversible manner, in a non-covalent manner. No, that's why it's easy for albumin to give it out to your tissues. Now, what about your ceruloplasmin? Your ceruloplasmin, no, this would bind copper, but albumin has more important physiologic role in the transport of your copper. Now, what your transcortin binds your corticosteroids, your haptoglobin binds your extracorpuscular hemoglobin, hemopexin would bind your heme, transferrin binds your iron, and your transthyretin, no, binds your prealbumin or your T4 and forms complex also with your retinol binding globulin. Okay. Now, the major protein of the human plasma is your albumin. Now, 40% of your body's albumin circulates, no, in the plasma, wherein it accounts for around 60% of your total plasma protein by weight. No? So that would be around 3.4 to 4.7 grams per deciliter. Now, your albumin is produced in the liver amounting to around 12 grams per day, and this would represent 25% of your total hepatic protein synthesis. Okay, now your albumin, remember, it is initially synthesized as your proalbumin in the liver, wherein afterwards the signal peptide is going to be removed by your signal peptidase. Now, as it passes into the cisternae of the rough endoplasmic reticulum, thereby converting your pre-proalbumin to your proalbumin. Now, your proalbumin is going to be converted to your albumin while inside the transport vesicle via this furin. Your furin would cleave this the hexapeptide, no, from your proalbumin, and subsequently your albumin is going to be released, no, into your plasma. Your mature albumin is consist of one peptide chain of 585 amino acid that is organized into 3 functional domains. No? Importantly, it is ellipsoidal in shape that is stabilized by 17 intrachain disulfide bands. Now, it being ellipsoidal and having low molecular weight, it does not increase your plasma viscosity. This is despite of it being abundant in your plasma. Now, aside from that, your albumin is also said to be the most hydrophilic plasma protein, no? And so therefore, it is able to exert significant osmotic pressure, no? 70 to 80% of the osmotic pressure is exerted by your mature albumin. And so your albumin has been used clinically for the treatment of your hypovolemic shock or even burns. Now, I mentioned earlier that your albumin is capable of binding various ligands, no, in a non-covalent manner, and so it is capable of binding these substances reversibly, no. So this is such as your free fatty acids, your calcium, or even your steroid hormones, copper, and as well as your drugs. And so therefore, your albumin as a plasma protein functions, number one, as a determinant of your oncotic pressure. It also functions as a mobile repository of your amino acids. And thirdly, it as transport or as carrier protein. Your albumin is considered as a negative acute phase reactant. Kung yung iba ay positive, no, acute phase reactant. Ito negative. Negative acute phase reactant meaning it tends to have decreased concentration as a result of either increased vascular permeability that is mediated by either your prostaglandins, histamines, and other vasoactive substances during inflammation. That's why in infection or inflammatory process, usually you will see patients, no, having decreased levels of albumin. Now, what are the causes basically of your hypoalbuminemia? Number one would be because of decrease in the synthesis of your albumin, secondary to malnutrition, malabsorption, or even liver disease. Remember, your albumin is being synthesized in the liver. Now, another would be increase in the increase of volume distribution, such as in cases of overhydration, placing you at a relatively hypoalbuminemic state, or because of increase in capillary permeability, no? Leading to the leakage of your albumin outside of the capillary, no? Or if it could also be secondary to an increased excretion or degradation of your proteins because of the presence of nephrotic syndrome, protein losing enteropathies, or even burns, or hemorrhage, or catabolic stress. Now, also, there are certain conditions that can cause an elevation in your serum albumin concentration, and primarily this is brought about by decrease in volume distribution, as in cases of your dehydration, or artificial elevation in your concentration of your albumin, such as in cases of prolonged application of your tourniquet for venipuncture. Now, the genetic mutation in the ALB gene will result in a condition which you call your analbuminemia. Okay, and this is an autosomal recessive condition wherein there is an impaired ability of the individual to synthesize albumin, and so this is characterized by moderate edema, and this is associated with lifelong compensatory increase in other plasma proteins that control hydrostatic pressure. So that this would therefore explain why there is only mild to moderate edema in this condition. And this is primarily due to the compensatory increase of your other plasma proteins. Okay, let's move now to your haptoglobin and your hemopexin. Okay, your haptoglobin is a plasma alpha sialoglycoprotein that binds your extracorpuscular hemoglobin in a hemoglobin haptoglobin complex. Okay, so your extracorpuscular hemoglobin is hemoglobin that is degraded and is released into the circulation. Remember that during normal red cell turnover, 10% of your erythrocytes hemoglobin escapes into the circulation and 90% are in your old RBCs, which are degraded by your cells of the histiocytic system. Now, and so as mentioned, the primary hemoglobin binding protein in the plasma is your haptoglobin, and it is capable of binding 40 to 180 milligrams of your hemoglobin per deciliter. Okay. Now, why is haptoglobin very important? What are the functions of your haptoglobin? For one, your haptoglobin would actually prevent the intravascular sequestration of your extracellular hemoglobin, and together, therefore, with reducing agents, your haptoglobin, through its intravascular sequestration of your extracellular hemoglobin, it is able to maintain your hemoglobin in a reduced, less reactive oxidation state. And this is important because the oxidative reaction at the hem moiety of your hemoglobin could possibly lead to your globin deposition, iron overload, lipid peroxidation, and ultimately to renal tubular injury. So therefore, the binding of your hemoglobin with your haptoglobin would result in the prevention of loss of free hemoglobin in the kidneys. It would also prevent oxidative damage. And so in effect also, there's also conservation of your iron. Now, let us take a look at this one. Remember, during the course of your RBC turnover, 10% of your erythrocytes hemoglobin escapes into the circulation. Now, with free extracorpuscular hemoglobin, it has a small molecular weight. At this molecular weight, it is able to pass through your glomerulus and form, therefore, precipitates into your tubules, or excreted to the urine. So that ultimately, this would lead to iron loss and kidney injury. However, take note, if your hemoglobin is bound to that haptoglobin in a hemoglobin haptoglobin complex, that molecular weight now increases to 155,000, and at this molecular weight, it cannot now pass through your kidneys. And so it's necessarily going to be catabolized in your liver cells, and so iron therefore is conserved and the kidneys are protected. Now, when your hemoglobin, when it is bound to your haptoglobin, it will be internalized by your macrophages. However, if you have this free hemoglobin, this free hemoglobin is capable of being translocated into your subendothelial space where your nitric oxide here is present and is capable of reacting with that free hemoglobin in the vascular wall. So your ferrous hemoglobin here can react with your nitric oxide via two reactions. So your hemoglobin undergoes nitric oxide deoxygenation, generating now this nitrate and your ferric hemoglobin. Further, this deoxygenated or deoxyhemoglobin undergoes iron nitrosylation by direct iron binding with your nitric oxide to the unbound ferrous hemoglobin. And so, ultimately, both reaction would lead to a decrease in your nitric oxide. Okay, the depletion now of your nitric oxide, would explain the acute vasoactivity of your extracellular hemoglobin. And so this is importantly attenuated by your haptoglobin. Okay. Remember earlier we mentioned that your plasma proteins has characteristic half-life in the circulation. However, in the presence of disease condition, the half-life of these plasma proteins can actually be altered. Now, your haptoglobin, the half-life is actually, if it's unbound, it's 5 days. However, If this haptoglobin is bound to your hemoglobin, the half-life now reduces to 90 minutes. So that, therefore, in cases wherein you have hemolytic anemia, wherein you have an increase in your hemoglobin because of your, or increase in your free hemoglobin because of hemolysis, no, there should now be an increase in the complex formation, leading now to rapid removal and fall in your haptoglobin levels. Okay. Also, your haptoglobin is said to be an acute phase protein. And so during inflammatory processes or inflammatory state, you expect an elevated levels or concentration of your haptoglobin. No? Remember, in inflammatory states, you have increase in the synthesis of your interleukin-6, and this would therefore increase the expression of your haptoglobin, which is a general adaptive response to infection as well as tissue injury. Now, another role of your haptoglobin is that it is considered as a scavenger protein, no? Wherein at the time of inflammatory conditions, it helps now collect and transport your cellular debris and break down products to your phagocytic cells, and so thereby conserving vital substances. Okay? Now, what about hemopexin? Hemopexin is a beta-1 globulin, and this time it binds heme and not your hemoglobin. The normal serum concentration is 50 to 120 milligram per DL, and it is important in limiting the toxicity of your free heme. So how does it do that? No, it actually prevents the intercalation of your heme into the cell membranes and the lipoproteins, thereby preventing heme-mediated oxidative reaction. It also attenuates heme toxicity on your vascular endothelium by blocking also the translocation of heme in the same mechanism as what is done by your haptoglobin to your extracorpuscular hemoglobin, so that attenuation of this heme toxicity in the vascular endothelium where there is a presence of your nitric oxide. Now, it also blocks heme activation of your immune receptors and vascular inflammatory processes. Now, take note that there are actually other proteins that are capable of binding your heme, but they cannot efficiently prevent heme intercalation into your lipid membranes or block heme's pro-oxidant and pro-inflammatory effects, except for your hemopexin. Okay, only hemopexin can do that. Now, remember earlier, we have this condition, your hemolytic anemia. Now, with massive hemolysis, this would result to a depletion in your circulating haptoglobin levels. Okay, so now you have, what would remain would be your unbound hemoglobin, and this unbound hemoglobin is going to be converted or oxidized, no, to your methemoglobin, and from which your heme is going to be transferred to your albumin, no, forming now your metheme albumin, and heme, no, which your metheme albumin subsequently transfer your metheme to your hemopexin, and this hemopexin and albumin, no, is going to be internalized by your hepatocytes via your what you call your LDL receptor protein 1, and be subsequently degraded to your bilirubin. Okay. Now, as a review, in summary of what we have discussed, remember again, during hemolysis, your extracellular hemoglobin is going to be released from the RBCs. And it should be necessarily be cleared, no, by your kidneys. Now, however, in the plasma, there is presence of your haptoglobin, and there is as well abundance of your antioxidants that is capable of stabilizing your hemoglobin in a reduced state so that it is less likely to participate in oxidative reaction. However, if this free hemoglobin is going to be translocated to the extravascular compartment, and wherein dimerization of your hemoglobin is favored by presence of low hemoglobin concentration and oxyhemoglobin state, no, this would undergo autooxidation. Now, so what does your haptoglobin do again? Your haptoglobin will bind your hemoglobin. So this is your haptoglobin to bind your hemoglobin in a hemoglobin haptoglobin complex, no? And so limiting therefore the translocation of your dimerized hemoglobin into the extravascular compartment, no, by sequestering your hemoglobin, no, and so therefore this is now capable of undergoing endocytosis via your scavenger receptor, which you call your CD163 of your monocyte macrophage of the spleen and liver, Kupffer cells, and then subsequently degraded into your bilirubin. Okay, and however, those that cannot be bound by your haptoglobin, no, the dimer will undergo autooxidation and subsequently release this heme. Okay, now this heme that is not bound to your haptoglobin will be bound by your hemopexin in the extravascular compartment, and this would also undergo endocytosis by this receptor, your LDL receptor protein 1 or your CD91, no, and undergo endocytosis, no, in your hepatocyte macrophage. Okay. Now, your transferrin is a plasma protein that is involved in your iron transport. Let us first talk about iron. Iron occurs in the body as part of your hemoglobin, myoglobin, or even your cytochromes, and around 1 to 1.5 milligram of iron is lost, no, of the 3 to 4 grams of your body iron per day. And females are said to be more prone to the development of your iron deficiency anemia because of the blood loss during menstruation. Okay, now let's talk about your iron absorption first, no? So your iron, okay, there are two main sources of your iron. One would be your organic, which is your heme iron from animal sources, and another would be your inorganic dietary iron, which is in the ferric form of iron, no, which is found in your vegetables or plant sources. Now, your inorganic, the absorption of your inorganic dietary iron is in the apical enterocyte of your proximal duodenum. Now, what happens here is that your ferric form of iron will have to be reduced to the ferrous form of iron by a ferrireductase, which you call your duodenal cytochrome B. And the reducing agent in this process is your vitamin C or your gastric acid. That's why it's important when you're taking your iron, you take it on an empty stomach or together with juice or your vitamin C, because it will enhance, no, the absorption of your iron. Now, your iron now in its ferrous form will be able to cross this transporter in the apical duodenum, which you call your divalent metal transporter 1. Now, once inside the enterocyte, no, your iron could be stored, no, bound to your ferritin, or it could actually cross through the basolateral membrane, no, to pass through your ferroportin into the circulation. Okay? Now, once it passes through your ferroportin in conjunction with this copper ferroxidase, which is your hephaestin, your ferrous form of iron would now be oxidized to its ferric form. Now, ang tanong nyo, Doc, ferric na yan bakit naman palitan ko pa yan ng ferrous, tapos babalik mo lang din naman pala sa ferric dito sa ibaba, no, pagka-absorb, no? Because remember, your divalent metal transporter 1 and even your ferroportin can only transport your ferrous form of iron. That's why it has to be converted to this ferrous form. Now, once in the circulation, your iron will have to ride on your transferrin, no, which is your transport, no, for your iron. And the type of iron that can ride on your transferrin is the ferric form of iron. That's why your ferrous form of iron will have to be oxidized to the ferric form of iron through this copper ferroxidase, which you call your hephaestin. Okay. Now, Doc, bakit naman niya kailangan sumakay sa transferrin? Okay, because free iron is extremely toxic. Okay, now your iron, as you can see here, this is your Fenton reaction. Your free iron can catalyze the formation of your free radicals from hydrogen peroxide, resulting now in tissue damage by oxidizing cellular macromolecules. Okay, now let's talk about your transferrin. Your transferrin is a beta-1 globulin. It is a glycoprotein that is synthesized in the liver, and it has 2 high affinity binding sites for your iron. Now, if your transferrin is occupied by 2 atoms of your iron, that is now what you call your holotransferrin. And again, what type of iron? What is the state of iron that can ride on your transferrin class? Ano makakasakay sa transferrin?
Ferric.
Yes, your ferric form of iron. Okay. Now, your iron, no, your transferrin, the concentration of your transferrin in the plasma is around 300 milligrams per deciliter. And with this concentration, it is sufficient enough to carry around 300 micrograms per deciliter of your 300 micrograms of your iron per deciliter of your plasma. And normally, this transferrin of yours is only 30% saturated. Okay, however, in the presence of iron deficiency, there is going to be less binding, no? So your transferrin is going to be less saturated, no? In cases of iron deficiency, it's only around 16% saturated, no? With your iron in the presence of iron deficiency. However, in presence of iron overload, no, the binding, no, or the saturation increases to around 45%. So that in presence of iron deficiency, no, wherein there is decrease in the saturation of your transferrin, this would now result to an increase in your total iron binding capacity. Okay, now why is transferrin therefore important aside from it limiting the toxicity of your iron? Your transferrin, no, through the transferrin cycle would now facilitate the cellular uptake of your iron. No? So your recipient cells, no, must bind your circulating transferrin, and this is via your transferrin receptor 1. Your transferrin receptor 1, this is your transferrin receptor 1. Okay, your transferrin receptor 1 is present on the surface of almost all of your cells of your, especially your erythroid precursors. Now, your holotransferrin, again, what is your holotransferrin class? Ano nga yung holotransferrin? It is
Transferrin plus ferric.
Plus 2 iron.
Yes. No, it is transferrin that is occupied by your ferric form of iron. So basically, 2 atoms of your iron, no, occupies this transferrin. Now, this holotransferrin would bind to the transferrin receptor 1, no, on your cells, no, and this would now undergo receptor-mediated endocytosis. Now, in the late endosome, once there is a drop in the pH, no, the iron here from your holotransferrin will now dissociate, no? That iron will now dissociate from your holotransferrin. And again, di ba, the form of iron or the state of iron that is present or that is riding in your transferrin is in the ferric form of iron. Eh kaso, ito si ferric form of iron, it has to leave that endosome to go to the cell, correct? So, it has to pass through this DMT1. What type of iron pass through your DMT1 transporter? Class?
Ferrous.
Yes, your ferrous form of iron. So ngayon, kailangan, no, you need now to reduce that ferric form of iron into the ferrous form of iron para makalabas yan dyan sa late endosome na yan. Okay, and this is via your STIP3. Your STIP3 is a ferrireductase. And the reducing agent in this process is what you call your NADPH. That is the reducing agent. Now, this transferrin that has been rendered vacant now by when your iron left, no? Okay, is what you now call your apotransferrin. Okay, apotransferrin na siya pag bakante na siya at wala na siyang bit-bit na iron. Okay, now this apotransferrin that is complex with your transferrin receptor 1, no, will now be transported back out of the cell membrane, and once it encounters the neutral pH of your circulation, that apotransferrin will now dissociate from the receptor and is now again ready to pick up another set of iron. Okay, now what about your ceruloplasmin? This is the binding protein for your copper. Okay, it is an alpha-2 globulin and it carries 90% of your copper in the plasma. O nasa napunta yung 10%? 10% no, is albumin bound. Okay, and since, as mentioned earlier, diba, your albumin binds this copper reversibly in a non-covalent bonding, no, it binds your copper less avidly or less tightly, and so the major source of your copper to the tissues is actually your albumin and not your ceruloplasmin, because your albumin can readily give off this copper, no, to your tissues. Okay, now your ceruloplasmin is synthesized in the liver. It has a peroxidase activity. It is blue in color, and this is due to high copper content, no, of your ceruloplasmin. One molecule of your ceruloplasmin is capable of binding 6 atoms of your iron. Now, what is the importance of this having peroxidase activity? No, your peroxidase activity, this is required for the oxidation of your ferrous form of your iron to the ferric form. Okay. Now remember, your RBC lifespan is 120 days. No, and your heme contains what type of iron? Ferrous form of iron. Pero ita-transport mo siya sa circulation, ferric form. Kasi sasakay siya sa transferrin, di ba? Okay, so what happens now to your senescent erythrocytes? Your senescent erythrocytes going to be phagocytosed by the macrophage, and in the process, no, it's going to release your heme, and heme is going to be acted upon by your heme oxygenase, now releasing now your ferrous form of iron and degrading your heme to your biliverdin. Okay, now this ferrous form of iron will have to leave that phagocyte, no? Would have to leave that macrophage, no, or phagocytic vesicle, no? And this is via your NRAMP1. Your NRAMP1 is a natural resistance associated macrophage protein 1. Okay? And subsequently, that ferrous form of iron is going to be transported out again via this transporter, which is your ferroportin. So paglabas niya dyan, it is in the ferrous form. Now, di ba, kailangan mo nga siyang you have to convert that ferrous form of iron to the ferric form of iron. Now, your ceruloplasmin has what? A peroxidase activity, so that it is capable now of oxidizing that ferrous form of iron to the ferric form of iron for it to be able to ride on your transferrin. Okay. Now, there are certain disease conditions, no? Your deficiency of your ceruloplasmin can arise either from genetic cause or even lack of your copper. Now, the deficiency in ceruloplasmin is what you call your hypoceruloplasminemia. Okay, so here you have an inability to recycle your iron, leading now to the accumulation of your iron in the liver as well as in other tissues. Now, in cases wherein there is a genetic mutation that abolishes the peroxidase activity, no, of your ceruloplasmin, this would now result to the progressive accumulation now of your iron in pancreatic islet cells and basal ganglia. And this is a condition which you call your aceruloplasminemia. Now, importantly also, there is a condition which you call Wilson's disease, no, wherein this is secondary to the mutation in the gene, no, for copper binding ATPase, no, particularly your ATP7B. So what happens in Wilson's disease is that because of this mutation, there is a block in the excretion of your excess copper in the bile. Now, copper, syempre, na-block yung excretion niya, copper would therefore accumulate in the liver. And now, you have a lot of copper there, no, this would now result to paradoxic interference now of the incorporation of your copper into your ceruloplasmin polypeptide, resulting now to what you call your apoceruloplasmin. Remember earlier, the transferrin that has been rendered vacant by your iron is what you call your apotransferrin. In the same manner here also, no, a ceruloplasmin that is not bound to your copper, no, is what you call your apoceruloplasmin. And so all of this now would result in the fall of your plasma ceruloplasmin as well as your copper toxicosis, no, resulting now to hemolytic anemia, chronic liver disease, or even neurologic disorder from neurodegeneration. Also, a form of treatment would be your penicillamine, because your penicillamine is capable of chelating your copper, which is subsequently excreted in the urine. Okay. Now, the human body can store up to around 1 gram of your iron, and majority of it is bound to your ferritin. Now, your ferritin forms a hollow ball with 24 polypeptide subunits, no, and the heavy subunit has your peroxidase activity. The light subunit has this ferritin nucleation, or is important for the stability, no, of this molecule. Now, your ferritin, no, normally it amounts to around 50 to 200 micrograms per deciliter. Now, remember earlier, when your ferrous form of iron is absorbed through the apical enterocyte, no, it will either go to your cross your basolateral membrane into your circulation, or be stored, no, bound to your ferritin in the ferric form. Kaso pumasok nga siya as a ferrous form of iron, no? So again, the presence of this peroxidase activity of your ferritin would now oxidize this ferrous form of iron to the ferric form of iron, and this ferric form of iron is the one that is stored, no, bound to your ferritin. Now, in the presence of iron overload, this would lead to a condition which you call your hemosiderosis. And if you have partly degraded form of your ferritin that contains iron, that is detected by your histological stains, and then now that is what you call your hemosiderin. Okay. Now, so how is your ferritin or even your transferrin receptor 1 regulated? No? The rates of synthesis of your transferrin receptor 1 and ferritin are reciprocally linked, no, to the intracellular levels of your iron. Okay, so take a look at this class. This is your IRE. This is your iron response element. This is your IRP, which is your iron regulatory protein. Now, your IRP is capable of binding either your iron or your IRE. Either yan, ha? So pag nag-bind siya sa iron, hindi na siya makaka-bind kay IRE. Kung nag-bind siya kay IRE, hindi na siya babind kay iron. Okay? Now, so what happens here? Your IRE, no, this is found in the mRNA coding for your ferritin and your transferrin receptor 1, and it is a target for binding of your IRP. Now, your IRE in the ferritin mRNA is located in the 5' end, no? And this is the coding region. Okay. Now, in the presence of increased iron, pag mataas yung iron, tandaan nyo, if you have increased iron, okay, so that means your IRP can bind to your iron. Okay? However, if you have decrease in iron, so wala nga yung pagbabindan si IRP. So anong mangyari? Si IRP, babind na lang siya kay IRE. Okay? In short, parang panakip butas si IRE. Alright? Now, so in cases wherein you have increase in levels of your IRP, increase in levels of your iron rather, okay, this would now bind to your IRP. So pag nakabind si IRP kay iron, hindi na siya ngayon makakabind kay IRE. libre ito. Okay? So if this is free, then so therefore, there is going to be translation, then ferritin is synthesized. However, if you have a decrease in your iron, no? Again, pag decrease yung iron, walang pagdidikitan si IRP. Your IRP cannot bind to that iron. So if it cannot bind to that iron, it will now bind to your IRE. No? It's going to bind to your IRE. So ngayon, nag-bind siya kay IRE, the translation is going to be blocked, no ferritin is going to be produced. So the relationship naman is reciprocal in your transferrin receptor 1 mRNA. Baliktad naman siya. Again, in the presence of your elevated iron levels, no? Okay, so ito muna pala tayo, no? Yung IRE. IRE in your transferrin receptor 1 mRNA is located at the 3' end. And this is the coding region. And you have your nucleases here. Okay. Now, in the presence of increase in iron, your IRP will bind to your iron. So kung nakabind si IRP kay iron, walang magbabind ngayon kay IRE. Okay, your IRE is free. Okay, and it's therefore free to be degraded by your nucleases. Okay, so that there is no translation, no transferrin receptor 1 that is synthesized. Okay, however, in the presence now of your decreased iron, no, your IRP would bind now to your IRE. Now, the binding of your IRP to IRE would exert somehow protective effect here, no, against your nucleases. This is not going to be degraded, so there's going to be translation. There's going to be synthesis of your transferrin receptor 1. Okay? Okay, now what about your hepcidin? Your hepcidin has a central role in your iron homeostasis. So basically, if there is too much iron in the circulation, your hepcidin will have to act, no, to decrease that amount of iron to avoid that iron overload. Okay. Now, so what are its function? It decreases iron absorption in the intestines. It prevents recycling of your iron from macrophages. It also reduces your placental transfer of iron. So how does it do that? Okay. Now your hepcidin here, no, is synthesized from in the liver as your prohepcidin. Okay, and it's subsequently going to be cleaved, no, to generate now your active form, your hepcidin. No, and this hepcidin is going to bind your ferroportin. Remember, your ferroportin is important for your iron absorption and your iron recycling. Now, once your hepcidin binds to your ferroportin, it's going to degrade that ferroportin. So that there's going to be ultimately a decrease in iron in the circulation. Now, as mentioned, your increased plasma iron would result to increase in hepcidin synthesis. So, paano nangyari yun? Again, okay. So, let me first introduce you to this pathway, no? Okay. Tanggalin ko lang yung picture ko dito. Mahirap eh. Okay. Now, let me introduce you to this pathway. Remember your transferrin? What do you call the transferrin that has been occupied by 2 atoms of your iron? Class? Class, are you still there?
Is it holotransferrin?
Yes, that is your holotransferrin. So this is your holotransferrin here. Okay? Now, this other protein here is what you call your HFE protein, no? This is an MHC class 1 like protein that is encoded by your hemochromatosis or HFE gene. Okay, and this influences iron absorption by modulating the expression of your hepcidin. Now, this one is your ERK-MAPK. Okay, this is your extracellular signal regulated kinase or your mitogen activated protein kinase. This one here is your BMP or your bone morphogenetic protein. And this is the co-receptor of your BMP. This is your hemojuvelin. Okay, and this is your BMP receptor, your SMAD. Okay, SMAD is a family of your intracellular proteins that are critical in transmitting to the nucleus signals for your transforming growth factor beta on your cell surface. This is the nuclear membrane of your nucleus. So, kailangan siyang tumawid dyan. Okay, so ang role niya is to transmit the signal into the nucleus. Okay, now this one is your interleukin 6 and this one is your STAT. STAT is your signal transduction and activator of your transcription. Okay, and then lastly, this is your HAMP gene or the hepcidin antimicrobial peptide that is important for the transcription of your hepcidin. Okay, so let's start with your hepcidin synthesis. Now, remember, if you have too much iron in the circulation, it has to now saturate your transferrin. Diba? And so you have a lot now of your holotransferrin. Now, this holotransferrin should occupy, anong tawag natin doon sa receptor ni holotransferrin? Class, what do you call the receptor for your holotransferrin? Class.
Transferrin receptor 1.
Yes, your transferrin receptor 1. However, your HFE protein competes with your transferrin receptor 1. I mean, with your holotransferrin for this transferrin receptor 1. So what happens now is that your holotransferrin will now occupy the transferrin receptor 1. So ano na mangyayari kay HFE protein? HFE protein will now be displaced. The displaced HFE protein will now occupy the transferrin receptor 2 alongside with your transferrin or your holotransferrin. And this one now is going to activate your this ERK MAPK to induce now your hepcidin expression. Further, your BMP here is going to occupy that BMP receptor and together with the co-receptor would now activate or would activate this R-SMAD which would dimerize that SMAD4. Okay, and together they will be translocated into the nucleus to bind to your BMP response element. This is BMP response element on your HAMP gene to induce now transcriptional activation of your hepcidin. Now, remember also class that your hepcidin is an acute phase protein. Okay, so that in the presence of inflammation, now, there is increase in the production or synthesis of your interleukin 6. Now, this interleukin 6 will act on its surface receptor, your interleukin 6 receptor, and would now activate your JAK-STAT pathway. So that STAT3 is going to be translocated into the nucleus and would bind to your STAT3 response element on your hepcidin gene to induce transcriptional activity. Okay? So all of this, makikita nyo, if there is increase in your iron, this is going to induce that gene. If there is also increase in your inflammatory process, it's also going to induce that gene. Okay, now, take note of these changes in various laboratory tests that is used to assess your iron deficiency anemia. Again, if you have iron deficiency, meaning you have decrease in your iron. If you have decrease in your iron, what would happen to your IRP class? Pag mababa ang iron levels mo, anong mangyayari sa IRP?
Magbabind po sa IRE.
Yes, your IRP will bind your IRE kasi wala naman siyang ibabind na iron. And if this happens in your ferritin mRNA, the binding of your IRP to your IRE will now induce a blockage, diba? In the translation of your ferritin. So you expect a decrease in your serum ferritin. Now also, remember your transferrin is normally saturated 30%, but in the presence of decrease in your iron, your transferrin saturation will also decrease, so that you leave behind a transferrin that has increase in your total iron binding capacity. And of course, in iron deficiency anemia, deficient na yung iron, natural lang naman, decrease yung serum iron mo. And the transferrin saturation, as I have mentioned earlier, is also going to be decreased. No, there is also, as you will note here, no, again, the reciprocal effect, no, of your into your ferritin, no, that's you have an increased transferrin receptor 1 synthesis in iron deficiency anemia. Okay, and in presence of iron deficiency anemia, the morphology of your RBC is that of your microcytic and hypochromic. Okay, so that's it for your plasma proteins and iron metabolism. So far, do you have any questions before we proceed to your hemostasis and thrombosis? Okay, so if none, let's proceed now with your hemostasis and your thrombosis. Okay, now when we say hemostasis, this is the cessation of your bleeding from severed vessels. This is a process by which your blood clots would form at sites of vascular injury, and the primary reaction here is an initial vasoconstriction causing now diminished blood flow distal to the site of injury. On the other hand, when we say thrombosis, this is the creation of your blood clots, meaning your thrombi, no, formation of your blood clots or thrombi within the intact blood vessels or within the chambers of the heart. And this occurs when the endothelial lining of the blood vessels are damaged or removed. Now, you have this sequence of events that is leading to your hemostasis. Number one, sabi nga natin kanina, you have your vasoconstriction, and this is going to be followed by your primary hemostasis, and then this is subsequently followed by your secondary hemostasis, and then lastly would be your thrombus formation and the antithrombotic events or your dissolution of your platelet plug. Now, let us go back, no, and discuss this. I will just give you an overview of the stages, no, or phases of your hemostasis. Now, as mentioned, there is initial vasoconstriction that is mediated by your reflex neurogenic mechanism, and this would now result to a reduce in the blood flow that is distal to the site of injury, and this mechanism is augmented by the secretion of your endothelin. But however, the vasoconstriction effect, no, or the reduced blood flow effect, no, is just but transient. That's why, no, your platelets would eventually have to be activated. Now, there are 3 stages in the formation of your hemostatic plug, no, in your primary hemostasis. No, that is your platelet adhesion, platelet activation, and platelet aggregation. Now, what happens in your adhesion? No, so your platelet, no, adhesion will involve the attachment of your platelet to the von Willebrand's factor and to your collagen of your damaged vessels. Now, subsequently, there will be change, no, in the shape of your platelet and secretion of your granules that is mediated by your thromboxane A2. We will discuss this more in detail later on. And then also thrombin here will further mediate your platelet activation with your fibrinogen that is important for the recruitment, no, as well as aggregation for your formation of your hemostatic plug. Okay. Now, further, no, coagulation factors will have to act, no, to stabilize that initial platelet plug which we previously formed, no, with subsequent thrombin generation, fibrinogen cleavage, fibrin mesh formation, and then lastly, there's going to be consolidation of the initial platelet plug. So therefore, your clot here is going to be stabilized, and then this is going to be followed by the resorption of that clot via the contraction and polymerization of that fibrin and platelet aggregation, resulting now to the dissolution of your platelet plug. So basically, your hemostasis and thrombosis would share the same three phases. That is your platelet aggregation, fibrin mesh formation, and lastly, that's the dissolution of your hemostatic plug. Now, we have discussed earlier about the initial vasoconstriction. Then afterwards, you now need to establish a platelet plug formation. So it starts off with your primary hemostasis. So what happens here is that, remember, with your vessel wall injury, there is now exposure of this collagen. Ito yung collagen, may expose yan. Okay, and then your von Willebrand's factor, which is synthesized by your subendothelium, would now bind to your collagen. This is your von Willebrand's factor. This class is your platelet. And this is the glycoprotein 1B of your platelet. Okay, now your von Willebrand's factor, again, which is synthesized by your subendothelium, would bind to that collagen, and platelet receptor of your glycoprotein 1B, to facilitate the adherence of your platelet to that injured vessel. Subsequently, there would now be initiation of a signaling cascade for your platelet activation, which we will also be discussing later on. But for now, what's important here is that with your platelet activation, this would now induce a conformational change in shape, of your platelet, so that this would now result to the activation of this, what you call your glycoprotein 2B3A. This glycoprotein 2B3A on your platelet is a high affinity binding site for your fibrinogen as well as your calcium. Now, what happens here is that this would now lead to binding of your fibrinogen. These blue beads here are your fibrinogen. Okay, now the binding of your fibrinogen will now further induce platelet aggregation in the site of injury, forming now or resulting to your primary hemostatic plug. Now, the most common hereditary bleeding disorder class, take note, is your von Willebrand's disease. Okay, that is the most common hereditary bleeding disorder, and your von Willebrand's factor is also important in stabilizing your factor 8. Now, a deficiency in your glycoprotein 1B is what you call your Bernard-Solier syndrome, and a deficiency in your glycoprotein 2B3A is your Glanzmann thrombasthenia. Okay, so there is now platelet adhesion. Next, you wanted to induce platelet activation via this signaling cascade. Again, remember, your platelet would adhere to your collagen, and that is mediated by your von Willebrand's factor. So basically, take note of this one. This is your plasma membrane of your platelet. This is the outer part, and this is the inner part. Okay, you have all of these receptors here. Itong diretso na yan, kita nyo panay receptors yan. Now, the platelet would adhere to your collagen that is mediated by your von Willebrand's factor via this glycoprotein 1B, which we have discussed earlier in high shear condition. However, in low shear conditions, your platelet glycoprotein can already directly bind to your collagen via your glycoprotein 1A, 2A, and your glycoprotein 6. Okay, now binding of your platelet receptors by this agonist. You have your agonist here, your thrombin, thromboxane A2, as well as your ADP. Now, the binding of these platelet receptors to this agonist would initiate now a signaling cascade in the pattern of outside-in transmembrane signaling, meaning the substances would have to react to this receptor outside and then induce a signaling cascade inside. Okay, so that is now your outside-in transmembrane signaling. Now, your thrombin here, take note, is the most potent activator of your platelet, and it acts as an external chemical messenger and interacts with these G protein coupled receptors, which you call your protease activated receptor or your PAR. Okay, now the activation of this PAR would cause the stimulation of your phospholipase C beta, okay, which will now hydrolyze your phosphatidyl inositol biphosphate, resulting now to the production of your diacylglycerol and inositol triphosphate. Okay, now your diacylglycerol is capable now of stimulating your protein kinase C to cause phosphorylation of your plextrin. And this would now lead to what? Platelet aggregation and as well as release of your platelet granules. On the other hand, your inositol triphosphate here is capable now or would induce the release of your calcium into your cytosol, and with binding to your calmodulin and myosin light chain kinase, this would now induce phosphorylation of your myosin light chain, which would interact with your actin in the shape of the platelet. The change in the shape of your platelet is very important, as we have mentioned earlier, because this conformational change will result in the cell surface activation of your glycoprotein 2B3A, which is important in a receptor for your fibrinogen. Now, further, the increase in your calcium now would stimulate your cytosolic phospholipase A2 to induce or stimulate the release or liberation of your arachidonate from your phosphatidylcholine. Okay, and subsequently, this arachidonate is going to be acted upon by your COX-1, producing now your thromboxane A2. Your thromboxane A2 is important because it's going to stimulate another receptor, which is your TP receptor, which would now further induce the release of your calcium via your phospholipase C beta. Now, your ADP, your ADP now binds to your purinergic receptors, which is your P2Y1 and your P2Y12. Your P2Y1 is mediated, your P2Y1 mediates the rise in your cytosolic calcium. On the other hand, your P2Y12 would mediate the inhibition of your adenylate cyclase. Bakit ba niya kailangan i-inhibit itong si adenylate cyclase? Because the presence of your adenylate cyclase would increase the cyclic AMP, and this would now lead to, or this would now result in the opposition of the increase in your calcium, thereby resulting to an inhibition of your platelet activation. Kaya i-inhibit niya ito. Okay? Now, so we mentioned that from outside, it's going to be an outside-in transmembrane signaling. So naisignal na sa loob. Okay, now from inside, you want to send signal again outside. Okay, so that's your inside-out signaling. And what happens there with an inside-out signaling, there is now going to be modification of your platelet surface glycoprotein 2B3A. So because of this signaling, inside-out signaling, there is going to be activation of your glycoprotein 2B3A, which is a receptor that has a higher affinity to your fibrinogen upon platelet activation. Okay, kaya gusto mo ngayon yung signaling process na ito. Okay, now we have discussed your vasoconstriction as well as the signaling cascade leading to the formation of your primary platelet plug. And now we will be discussing the stabilization of your platelet plug via the activation of your coagulation cascade, and then later on your your hemostatic plug dissolution. Okay, so let's first discuss your coagulation protein system. Okay, so the zymogen for your coagulation system can be grouped into two. You have your surface-bound zymogens, and which also your phospholipid-bound. This one is the phospholipid-bound. Okay, So this surface bound zymogen, this is you have your factor 12, prekallikrein, and factor 11 of your contact system, and this is present in your intrinsic pathway. Now, this one, the phospholipid bound, no, is your vitamin K dependent zymogens. They are your factor 7, 9, 10. Basically, they are your factors 2, 7, 9, 10, and your protein C. Now, you also have cofactors or substrates, no, in your plasma coagulation system that would speed up the coagulation or activation process of all of these factors. You have your high molecular weight kininogen, factor 8, factor 5 fibrinogen, as well as your protein S. Okay. Now, there are two pathways leading to your fibrin clot formation. One is the extrinsic and another would be the intrinsic pathway. No? Your extrinsic pathway, here you have the initiation of your fibrin clot that is in response to your tissue injury. On the other hand, with your intrinsic pathway starts with the autoactivation of your factor 12. Okay, by a negatively charged surface in vitro, or it can also happen in vivo as what we will be discussing later on. Okay, now take note that both of this pathway, your extrinsic and your intrinsic pathway, both would lead eventually to the activation of your prothrombin to thrombin, and your thrombin is important because it catalyzes the cleavage of your fibrinogen to your fibrin. Now, the extrinsic pathway involves your tissue factors, no, of your injured vessels, no, factor 7, factor 10, and even your calcium. Okay, so how does this work? No, the tenase complex, no, basically these are the components of your tenase complex. As what I have mentioned earlier, the tenase complex, no, functions to speed up the activation of your zymogens, no, which in this case is your factor 10. Now, the tissue factor that is located in the subendothelium that is exposed upon tissue injury would now interact with your factor 7 and activate that factor 7. Your factor 7 is a zymogen, is a vitamin K dependent zymogen. It has a gamma carboxyglutamate amino terminal region that would serve as a high affinity binding site for your calcium, which we will be discussing later on. But importantly, with the activation of your factor 7, no, this is also a serine protease. And so it is able now to cleave that arginine isoleucine bond of your factor 10 to activate that factor 10. Now, your tissue factor, factor 7, no, is also capable of activating your factor 9 in the intrinsic pathway. Okay. Now, we've been discussing vitamin K. What's the importance of your vitamin K? Your vitamin K here is important in the carboxylation process of the glutamic residues. Now, you have here your precursor clotting factors, 2, 7, 9, 10. No, meron yan sa dulo nila, your glutamyl residue. May isang COO negative dyan. Okay? Now, what you want to do during carboxylation is you want to double this up. Gusto mong dumalawa yung COO mo. Okay, so gusto mong dumalawa. Bakit gusto mo siyang dumalawa? Because the COO, it being negatively charged, no, this would serve as high affinity binding site for your calcium. No, it is a good chelator of your positively charged calcium ions, no, which we will be discussing later on. So going back, okay, what you need here is your gamma glutamyl carboxylase, carbon dioxide, oxygen, as well as your hydroquinone form of your vitamin K. Now, your vitamin K epoxide now activates, no, the glutamate residue, no, of your precursor clotting factors to a carbon ion, and this carbon ion would react to your carbon non-enzymatically to your carbon dioxide, producing now this gamma carboxyglutamate residue. No, so again, kailangan mo itong dalawang COO negative. At bakit mo sila kailangan? Because as you can see here, they will serve as high affinity binding site for your calcium to form calcium bridge between your mature clotting factor and your membrane phospholipids of your platelet. Okay. Now, the major physiologic inhibitor of your coagulation is what you call your tissue factor pathway inhibitor. It is capable of directly inhibiting your factor 10. And the TFPI factor 10 complex could further inhibit your factor 7. Okay. Let's move now to your intrinsic pathway. No? So remember that the activation of this factor 10 of yours, this is the major site where your intrinsic and your extrinsic pathway would converge, and this provides an important link between your intrinsic and extrinsic pathway. Now, intrinsic pathway would result in the production of your activation of your factor 10 that is cleaved by your tenase complex, no? In the intrinsic pathway, it is cleaved by the activated factor 9 with its cofactor, which is your factor 8. And this pathway is actually initiated by your contact phase, no? And primarily the auto-activation of your factor 12, no, when it is associated with your negatively charged surface. Okay, now, you have this what you call plasma-borne contact activators, no? So you have this contact activators which are responsible for activating your factor 12, no? So you have this your poly-P. You also have this PAG, no, which is your misfolded protein aggregates. You also have heparin, or you also have your oversulfated chondroitin sulfate. All of these are said to be your contact activators. Now, these activators now are capable now of activating, as mentioned, your factor 12. Your factor 12 would in turn trigger your thrombosis via your factor 11 mediated intrinsic coagulation pathway. Another would be your factor 12 would also be capable of activating your prekallikrein, no, and as well as your bradykinin via your high molecular weight kininogen, and both of which would drive now induction of your inflammation. Now, your poly-P is a polyphosphate that is released from your platelet dense granules. It is an activator of the contact phase, thrombin, and as well as factor 11, and it accelerates also the activation of your factor 5. Likewise, it abolishes the inhibitory effect of your TFPI, and so all of this would necessarily lead to your coagulation. Okay. Now, remember earlier that the activation of your factor 12 would happen in the presence of your negatively charged surface. No? This is artificial surface, but more importantly, you have your biological surfaces, no? Especially this one, as you can see in your bacteria. So that in the presence of your sepsis, no, di ba kayo nagtataka, why is there hypercoagulopathy in sepsis resulting now to your consumptive coagulopathy? No, and all of this is because of the auto-activation of your factor 12 by the presence of your bacteria. Now, your factor 12 activation could likewise be your factor 12 could likewise be activated upon proteolysis by your kallikrein, and your factor 12 now therefore attacks your pre-kallikrein to generate more of your kallikrein, and factor 12 would further activate your factor 11, and together with calcium it's going to activate your factor 9, and your factor 9, which is a gamma carboxyglutamate vitamin K dependent zymogen, would now cleave the arginine isoleucine bond again of your factor 10 to activate that factor 10. Now, your factor 8 is a glycoprotein precursor. It is not a protease, and it is a cofactor that would serve as a receptor for your factor 9 as well as your factor 10, and it is activated by minute quantities of your thrombin. Now, the deficiencies in your factor 8 and factor 9 are the most prominent bleeding disorders that occur in patients who survive gestation as well as who survive birth. No? Okay, so the deficiencies in factor 8 and factor 9 would lead to a condition which you call your hemophilias. No, your hemophilias are X-linked disorders. Please take note your your number 8 would come before number 9 and A comes before B. Okay, so your 8 no is associated with hemophilia A and 9 is associated with hemophilia B. But both of these are X-linked disorders, no, wherein you have mutations that include partial gene deletions, point and missense mutation. Now, how do you diagnose? Prenatal diagnosis would be via your DNA analysis after chorionic villus sampling, and treatment is by giving your recombinant factor 8 and factor 9. Okay, now you are able to activate your factor 10. So it's important no, for the activation now of your prothrombin to your thrombin. Okay. Now, activation of your prothrombin would require your prothrombinase complex, which would include your calcium together with factor 5, factor 10, as well as your prothrombin on membrane surface. And your factor 5 here would serve as a cofactor. It binds specifically your platelet membrane and would complex with factor 10 and your prothrombin. Now, your factor 5 is a glycoprotein that is synthesized in the liver, spleen, as well as the kidneys. And it is found in your platelet and your plasma, and its function, as I mentioned, as a cofactor. It is activated by your thrombin. However, it is inactivated by your activated protein C. No, your activated protein C would limit the activation, therefore, of your prothrombin to thrombin via your factor 5. Now, your prothrombin is a single-chain glycoprotein. It is synthesized in the liver and it has 10 gamma-carboxyglutamate residues in its amino terminal. No, so upon binding of your factor 5 and your factor 10, your prothrombin is going to be cleaved by your factor 10 to generate now your thrombin, which is released from your platelet. Now, you have thrombin. So what's now the purpose or significance of your thrombin? Thrombin is important for the conversion of your fibrinogen to your fibrin. Okay. Your thrombin, again, it is a serine protease and it is produced by your prothrombinase complex. It has a potent stimulatory effect on your platelet. And as mentioned, it converts your fibrinogen to fibrin. But importantly also, your thrombin is capable of activating your factor 13, factor 5, factor 8, as well as your factor 11. Okay? So, pakitandaan yan, class. Now, what about your fibrinogen? Your fibrinogen is factor 1. It is a soluble plasma glycoprotein and it consists of 3 non-identical pairs of your polypeptide chain. This is the principal substrate for your thrombin, and this is the principal adhesive molecule for your platelet aggregation, as what we have discussed earlier. Now, this is how your fibrinogen molecule would look like. This is a dimeric molecule and each half is composed of 3 non-identical polypeptide chain of your fibrinogen, fibrinogen A chain, B chain, and also your gamma chain that is covalently linked by your disulfide bonds. Now the N-terminal or the amino terminal here is held close together or in close proximity by this disulfide bonds. Okay, however, the carboxyl terminal is the one that is spread apart. Now, here in your N-terminal, you have your A and B proteins. You have your fibrinopeptide A and your fibrinopeptide B. Okay, so this fibrinopeptide A and fibrinopeptide B possesses highly negatively charged, and this is due to the abundance of your aspartate and glutamate residues. So what is the importance of this being negatively charged? No, the negative charges would contribute to the solubility of your fibrinogen in the plasma, and this would serve as, it would serve to prevent the aggregation now of your fibrinogen because of electrostatic repulsion. Now, okay, so this is another structure, no, or illustration of your fibrinogen. No, it is a trinodular molecule, and take note here in the middle, you have this E globular domain, and that is connected to two lateral D globular domain by this coil. And these are your fibrinopeptides, C, and this is your C domain. Okay, now what does your thrombin do? Your thrombin now hydrolyzes four arginine glycine bonds, no, between your fibrinopeptides and the fibrin chain, therefore releasing now your fibrinopeptide and generating now your fibrin monomer. And this is how it's going to look like. Okay, so remember, this is your fibrinogen. You have your fibrinopeptides here. This is your E globular protein, and these ones are your D domain. Okay, with the action of your thrombin would cleave the four arginine glycine bonds, now releasing now your fibrinopeptides. Okay, once this fibrinopeptide is released, you will now have this fibrin monomer with its exposed binding sites. No, bakit importante itong exposure of binding sites? Because this is where the aggregation of your fibrin monomer will happen in a half staggered arrangement. No, this is where your D domain is going, D domain of your other fibrin monomer is going to bind. Okay? So produce now their fibrin polymer. Okay, however, that fibrin polymer is still unstable. It's unstable, and so what you need, no, you need this to undergo cross-linking. Okay, and this will happen via your transglutaminase, which is your factor 13, which is activated also by your thrombin. So your thrombin activates this factor 13, which is your transglutaminase, which is important for the cross-linking of your fibrin molecule. So how does this cross-linking happen? No, there's going to be a cross-link between the amide group of your glutamine and the amino group of your lysine residue in your fibrin. Okay, now you have your fibrin. Of course, subsequently, this has to undergo dissolution, no, to your fibrin degradation products, and this is going to happen by your plasmin. No, your plasmin is going to be activated from your plasminogen. Okay. Now, your plasminogen is an inactive zymogen of your plasmin, and it binds to your fibrin and is incorporated in the blood clots. No, an inhibitor of your plasmin is your alpha-2 antiplasmin. Your plasmin here is a serine protease that is mainly responsible for the degradation of your fibrin and fibrinogen, and it remains active, no, as long as it is bound to your fibrin. Your plasmin is protected from the action of your antiplasmin once it is bound to your fibrin. Now, your plasminogen is going to be converted to your plasmin via what you call this plasminogen activator. So example of your plasminogen activators would include your TPA or tissue plasminogen activator or your urokinase. Okay, so they are found in most of your body tissues, and what happens is that these plasminogen activators would necessarily cleave the arginine valine band of your plasminogen to produce now your activated plasmin. Okay, now your plasmin would specifically bind, no, to the lysine residues on your fibrin, and so thus increasing its incorporation into the fibrin mesh as it continuously cleaves this fibrin mesh. No, so the plasmin would cleave this, what you see, this is your coiled coil, di ba? Naalala nyo kanina, that is connecting your E globular domain to your D domain. Now, however, remember, di ba, nagkapatong-patong na nga yan because of the fibrin polymerization. Now, in the presence of fibrin, no, this is going to be degraded. No, so you release now this one. You have two D domains here, and this is what you call your D dimer. That's why one of the laboratory tests that you request, no, to quantify your fibrin degradation products would be that of your D dimer. Okay, because it is the one that is released during fibrin degradation. Okay. Now, your activated thrombin activatable fibrinolysis inhibitors and important inhibitor of your fibrinolysis. It removes the terminal lysines, no, from your fibrin. No, remember your plasmin is would act, no, or incorporate itself into the lysines of your fibrin. Now, your TAFI would remove this terminal lysines from your fibrin, thereby inhibiting fibrinolysis, no? And this is activated by your thrombin. Okay, your TPA, no, as mentioned earlier, this is a serine protease that is released in the circulation after your vascular injury. It is inactive unless it is bound to your fibrin, and it is important in activating your plasmin, no, to form soluble degradation products and dissolve your clots. Okay, now, of course, there should be control of your thrombin formation. You cannot just clot and clot and clot your blood. Okay, now this happens via a feedback mechanism or inactivation, no, via your antithrombin. So basically, there should be a balance of activation and inhibition. Now, your antithrombin, this is the most important thrombin inhibitor, contributing to around 75% of your antithrombin activity. Now, it inhibits your factors 9, 10, 11, 12, and factor 7 that it's complex with your tissue factors. Now, in the presence of inherited deficiencies of your antithrombin, the person, no, or the individual is going to be prone to the development of your venous thrombosis. Okay. Now with your heparin, no, your heparin is an anticoagulant, no. Your antithrombin is greatly potentiated by binding of your heparin to inhibit coagulation, and this heparin now induces a conformational change in your thrombin to promote now its binding to your thrombin and other factors. Now, an antidote for this one is what you call your protamine sulfate, and it binds strongly to your heparin, thus therefore inhibiting heparin's binding to your antithrombin. Now, another regulatory mechanism is brought about by your thrombin. Remember, class, your thrombin has a potential to induce coagulation. It also has a potential to inhibit coagulation. Now, when your thrombin is bound to your thrombomodulin is a glycoprotein on an endothelial cells. No, when your thrombin is bound to your thrombomodulin, is capable of activating that protein C, and combined with protein S, this would result in the degradation of your factor 5 and your factor 8. Now, the presence of mutation in your factor 5 gene would lead to a condition which you call your factor 5 laden thrombophilia, wherein there is a substitution of your R gene into your glutamine at position 506. So that your factor 5 would become resistant to the activation of your APC, no? So that this would lead to an increase in the risk for your venous thrombotic disease. Now, another regulatory mechanism, remember this one earlier, now wherein almost all of the signaling cascade would lead to your platelet activation. But this one, your prostacyclin, no, your prostacyclin here is capable of stimulating your adenylate cyclase. And as mentioned earlier, the stimulation of your adenylate cyclase would result to an increase in your cyclic AMP. No, and so this would now oppose the increase in your calcium, thereby inhibiting your platelet activation. Now, other regulatory mechanisms would be the presence of your ADPase, which is important in the hydrolysis of your ADP. Your heparan sulfate, this is an anticoagulant that binds your antithrombin. Your plasminogen activators to activate your plasmin and dissolve thrombi. Nitric oxide, which is an important or potent platelet inhibitor. And then, of course, your thrombin, if it is combined with your thrombomodulin plus your protein C, is also capable of your inhibiting your coagulation. Now, a drug, no, an antiplatelet drug that inhibits your platelet responses is your aspirin, and it irreversibly acetylates and inhibits your COX-1. Remember earlier that your COX-1 is important because it is it activates your adenylate cyclase, your arachidonate to produce your thromboxane A2, and subsequently this thromboxane A2 would bind to your TP receptors to again stimulate your phospholipase C beta. Okay, now what are the indications for you to give your aspirin? You have your acute coronary syndrome, acute stroke syndrome, severe carotid artery stenosis, as well as prevention of your atherothrombotic disease. Okay, we have already discussed this one. We just want to discuss this warfarin. No? So what is now the role of your warfarin? Your warfarin would basically inhibit the recycling of your vitamin K. Remember that you need this hydroquinone form of your vitamin K. Now, your warfarin would inhibit the recycling of your vitamin K in a two-step process. Now, your vitamin K epoxide reductase and quinone reductase are going to be inhibited by your warfarin so that your vitamin K epoxide cannot be reduced and therefore would accumulate and subsequently be excreted. Therefore inhibiting vitamin K dependent carboxylation of your glutamate residues of your precursor clotting factors. Okay, now differentiating this one, so your heparin is given by the parenteral route. Your warfarin is oral. Your heparin activates your antithrombin 3, while your warfarin inhibits your vitamin K. The antidote for your heparin is protamine sulfate, and for that of your warfarin, that is your vitamin K. Your vitamin K will bypass the coumarin-induced inhibition of your epoxide reductase and would allow, therefore, post-translational carboxylation to happen. However, it is quite slow and would require around 12 to 24 hours. Now, your heparin, this is only given for shorter periods of time. Now, but for warfarin, this can be given for longer periods. Okay, let's now move to your laboratory test. So this is just going to be an overview. You will have a separate discussion of this one when you go to your laboratory diagnosis. Now, your platelet count quantitates the number of your platelets in your circulation. Now, your APTT assess the coagulation proteins of the intrinsic and common pathways, while your PT assess the coagulation proteins of your extrinsic and common pathway. Now, this is the basis for your INR, which is used to monitor your warfarin as well as your anticoagulation. Now, what about your thrombin time? This is a direct measure of your fibrinogen function or the presence of your thrombin inhibitor, while your D-dimer, as we have discussed earlier, this is a test for your fibrin degradation products. Okay, now you also have this drugs, which we will be also discussing. You will have a proper discussion of this when you go to your pharmacology. This is just an overview. Okay, now your aspirin, as mentioned earlier, even your NSAIDs, this is important in inhibiting your thromboxane synthesis by blocking your cyclooxygenase. And your clopidogrel, no, this is a P2Y12 receptor antagonist that inhibits the ADP pathway, and your inhibitor of your phosphodiesterase is your dipyridamole. And this would now result to an increase in your cyclic AMP, thereby inhibiting your platelet activation. And this is used in prevention of your thrombosis in your artificial heart valves. Now, your alteplase, no, is a large human protein, and this is produced in the bacteria through your recombinant DNA. And this directly converts your fibrin-bound plasminogen to your plasmin. No? Another would be your anistreptase, no, and this is a slow-release human TPA from recombinant DNA. Now, your streptokinase, this is obtained from your bacterial culture, and this is capable of degrading now your circulating fibrinogen, fibrin, and your plasminogen that is bound to your clot. However, this is less selective, no? And so this has a greater potential, no, for bleeding during therapy. What about your urokinase? We mentioned this earlier. This directly converts your plasminogen to plasmin. Okay, look at this class. This is table. No, you have these tables, no, that you will see in your Harpers. This is basically the summary of everything that we have discussed, no, in your coagulation pathway. Kindly review this so that you will know which proteins are have regulation function for your thrombosis, which of your proteins have serine protease activity. Okay, so that's it for my lecture this afternoon. These are my references. Do you have any questions, class? Okay, so if you do not have any more questions, no, you may now leave the virtual floor, and thank you for listening, class. Okay, the video, the annotated video will be uploaded after I have given lecture to all of the other sections. So that's going to be next week. All right? Okay, so class, please do stay safe. Ingat kayo, class. Bye, class.
Thank you po.
Thank you po.